Russia is the largest country in the world and the richest in natural resources. Russians consider it great and themselves as chosen by God. But what would happen if this behemoth were to disappear from our planet in an instant? Not only would Russia vanish, but all Russian achievements as well. What would happen to our civilization? Absolutely nothing. The world wouldn't even notice Russia's disappearance. Because Russia has given nothing to this world. All of the epoch-making Russian inventions, like the radio and Mendelev's periodic table, were invented simultaneously in other countries. In fact, they were even invented earlier than in the swamps. For some reason, the whole world is convinced that Marconi didn't invent the radio. And in the West, Mendelev's periodic table is simply called the periodic table, because they don't acknowledge that it was invented by a bearded man. The French consider their compatriot Alexandre, Émile Béguier de Chamcourtois, to be the pioneer. This scientist developed his systematization of chemical elements back in 1862, that is, 9 years before Mendeleev. The English attribute these achievements to their own William Odling and John Alexander Newlands. Both scientists attempted to systematize the chemical elements in 1864. Here, it doesn't even matter who came up with it first. What matters is that, as we can see, even without the Russian Mendeleev, the world would still have ended up with a table. And it's the same in all areas of culture, science and life. Cars, airplanes, everything is copied from Western counterparts. And what's more, it's copied very poorly.
They replaced their excellent disc brakes with drum brakes, which were significantly worse. They also installed a starter handle, a choke, and made the body out of much thicker, more durable metal. They probably thought to themselves, aha, now this is truly advanced and a significant improvement. The West never thought of that.
Even Soviet plombier ice cream, which makes vatniks drool and feel proud at the mere mention of it, was invented in the USA. The original recipe was brought to the Soviet Union in the 1930s. And something tells me the authentic original taste is much, much better. Let the minister keep hoping, Zashikni. B. If Russia disappears, no one will notice. Maybe only 2 Yotaphone users will quietly shed a tear.
I'm addressing the Kiev junta. Listen carefully. You can bomb our oil depots. You can bomb our air bases. You can destroy our warehouses. But if even one more distillery gets hit, you're fool.
I can already hear the outraged howls coming from the cabbage-scented kitchens of Nowheresville. But what about ballet and literature? What's the name of this country? Ballet. Ballet is an Italian invention from the Renaissance era. In Italian, it literally means to dance. By the way, the Muscovites never experienced the Renaissance. Not in everyday life, nor in culture. Serfs weren't allowed. While Da Vinci was creating the Mona Lisa and Dante was writing his Divine Comedy, out in the swamps they were still trading peasants for dogs, and carving Procor was here on birch trees, although even that is doubtful. Very few people in Moscow could even write. And ballet only took root in Russia in the 19th century, and it was developed by Western choreographers and composers Didelot, Perrot, Petipa, Kavos, and Pugny. All those names are foreign, not Russian at all. The world will somehow survive the disappearance of Russian literature as well. We can easily do without the imperial propagandists Pushkin and Dostoevsky. Lev Tolstoy wrote half of War and Peace in French, so at the very least 2 volumes will remain. In an instant, on 1/6 of Earth's land, only a lonely Matryoshka doll will be left. Although the Matryoshka isn't a Russian invention either.
Now that's a twist!
The Matryoshka was first cobbled together in 1891 at the Moscow workshop Children's Upbringing. In fact, it was an exact copy of a figurine of the Japanese god Fukurokuju, which had been brought to Moscow from the island of Honshu. The Japanese figurine consisted of two halves. Inside it was another, smaller figurine, and it also came apart. There were a total of 5 figurines. So, the Russian Matryoshka is simply a repainted Japanese Daruma doll. If the USA, Britain, France, Germany, Japan or China were to disappear, the world would plunge into the Stone Age. Our civilization would cease to exist without the achievements of these countries and peoples. If Russia were to disappear, at most what would be lost is support for dictatorial regimes in the UN Security Council.
Among the documents we received regarding the study of the possibility of spreading dangerous infections through migratory birds, including highly pathogenic influenza and Newcastle disease as well as bats, which can be considered as delivery vectors.
There are many peoples who also cannot boast of the greatest achievements. But at least these peoples do not try to destroy what others have created. As for Russia, its goal is to break and defile everything it can steal. No one would argue that, when it comes to inciting hatred and committing war crimes, Russia currently has no equal. If Russia were to disappear, dozens or perhaps even hundreds of smoldering conflicts around the globe would vanish as well. Moscow supports dozens of dictatorial regimes and terrorist organizations with both weapons and finances. Russia has reached a point where it does this openly. Just look at their diplomatic relations with the Taliban. For Russians, they are no longer considered terrorists.
If you have indeed made a significant mess and done something quite substantial, together with the Federal Security Service and a number of other prominent Russian agencies, they are diligently finalizing the legal process to officially remove the Taliban movement from the so-called terrorist list.
For Russia, it is now considered normal to execute women for improper clothing and to wipe out entire ethnic groups as practiced by the Taliban. Why not? After a girl is stoned in a stadium, go to Moscow for some tea and to cozy up with the sad horse.
Sorry for the question, but today, thanks to you, everyone is discussing this. Why are you interested in the fate of the quadra bears in Armenia? This is being discussed everywhere right now. Well, that we had the time.
After Russia disappears, the world will become kinder and safer. With the disappearance of the aggressive Russian entity and the misanthropic Russian ideas, first and foremost, life will improve for the residents of the former Russia themselves.
I work within the bureaucracy, I see how all of this happens. On the one hand, I'm glad for the bureaucracy, I'm a bit of a bureaucrat myself, I like the chaos. But on the other hand, I hate the chaos. I also want automation to take hold. But until that automation happens, whether under Putin or under Navalny, everything will stay the same as it is now.
Perhaps when the Russian population stops thinking about greatness around the clock, stops worshipping the Sarmat missile, and stops dreaming about the destruction of Western civilization, they'll have time left to focus on their own well-being. If Russians were to stop thinking about wars and global domination, perhaps they would come up with truly new inventions, achieve remarkable things in culture, and maybe a society thoroughly cleansed of Zit fascism could indeed become successful.
Today, the head of the Russian government was shown the first Russian smartphone. The device with 2 screens, called the Yotophone, was presented to Dmitry Medvedev by the chairman of the Rostec Corporation, Sergei Chemezov.
The whole problem with Russia and the Russians is that they simply don't want to live well. They want everyone else in the world to live just as badly as they themselves do. They want Switzerland to resemble Mordovia, not the other way around. The Russian world is destructive. That's why Russia can't boast of great discoveries. They attacked Ukraine only to prevent Ukrainians from becoming truly successful. Moscow wants so desperately to hinder Ukraine's development that it's willing to plunge its own country into utter poverty and complete ruin just to spite its immediate neighbor.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.